Hey yo everyone, gather around. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and a Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
Yeah, all right. Well, welcome officially to The Critical Social Worker. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to have Daniel Maté here with me. I'm really looking forward to this dialogue. How you doing this morning, Daniel?
I'm pretty good, thanks, Christian. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. How's it over there? You're in New York City, right?
I'm in New York City, yeah. It's not frosty yet. You know, we haven't gotten to where you guys are at. Obviously, you're much further north. It's fall here. You know, we've got trees turning colors, mostly nice, and alternating between crisp, sunny weather and, you know, wet, soggy weather, which I'm used to being from the Pacific Northwest, Vancouver, you know. So, no, it's nice. And obviously heavy times in the world right now as we're speaking. But I have very little to complain about personally. Things are good.
Yeah, well, you have some idea of what Alaska might be like just because of being from the Pacific Northwest, but I can't imagine a starker contrast between rural Alaska and New York City, you know what I mean?
No, pretty different topographically and geographically and culturally. I'm looking out your window there. Yeah, I can imagine that being, you know, the Washington, San Juan Islands or something like that. Like I can, you know what I'm saying? Actually, Alaska and the Yukon is definitely on my list of places to explore. I've driven most of North America, all of the lower 48 U.S. states, and much of Canada, but I've never been to Alaska, and it's very much on my list of places that I have to visit.
Yeah, well, we'd love to have you. Well, so I was watching some of your, I think it was Instagram videos or Instagram pictures, and you always have your I don't know what you call it, but you know, your next up plan for the vinyl records. You had the 3 on the wall. We just have one at our house. But and I enjoy, you know, your little tidbits about pop culture and stuff and whatnot. I can't remember his name, but I also saw your post of your guy with the Sicilian from The Princess Bride, and it's funny because I'm reading the book with my little children right now, so it's a pleasure to see that. What's his name?
Wallace Shawn is the guy's name, who is a wonderful actor, obviously, been in all kinds of stuff, but he's also a playwright and writes really dark, interesting stuff, and politically is very good, I think. He wrote a monologue called The Fever, which, you know, this guy grew up Upper West Side, kind of New York literary royalty. His dad, Wallace Shawn's dad, was the editor of The New Yorker. So he was born into kind of, you know, assimilated Jewish upper crust aristocracy of you know, hanging out with the who's who of New York culture. And he came around to a point of view that's just much more interrogating his own. You want to talk about interrogating your own privilege? He wrote a monologue back in the 80s or 90s called The Fever about a guy very much like himself who has lived a very comfortable life his whole life, and then he takes a trip to some third world country. He doesn't specify where it is. And then he sort of gets kind of obsessed with visiting these places that we're not supposed to know about and that our policies affect. And he starts reconsidering his relationship with his own privilege, you know? And it was a remarkable thing for someone to be writing about back in the 80s or 90s. But so he was, I always really admired him. And he's also just a hilarious and very thoughtful actor. You know, My Dinner with Andre, another Vanya on 42nd Street's another great film of his. So yeah, I posted a picture of, but most people know him as the little inconceivable guy from The Princess Bride.
Yeah, my kids love that. They've got the inconceivable word in their vocabulary now. Well, going back to the vinyl records, so just to get things started off a little bit more lighthearted, if we were going through the pandemic again and you was locked in your apartment or whatever, and you only were able to keep the 3 records on the wall, which 3 would they be? What would you have
Oh,
up there.
come on, man. Come on.
I tried to do this
That's-
myself, and I couldn't do it. So I'm not going to share mine. I just thought I'd ask you.
I mean, that's ridiculous. 3? I could name 10. I don't know if I can name 3. Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, in terms of now that I have our actual record player, the records that are sounding the best to me lately are, I don't know, like Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys. Just you hear all the samples so vividly. I just listened to Marquee Moon by Television. I might pull out a Joni Mitchell album. I might pull out a Metallica album. I don't know. There's just so much. There's actually no. You know what? I would definitely choose. There's a jazz album. Billy Taylor Trio plays songs from the musical My Fair Lady, which is really cool. Quincy Jones did the arrangements, and it's like an old school jazz combo playing jazzed up versions of stuff from that musical, and it's that's great. So maybe I would choose that, but such a tough question to lead off with, man.
Yeah, I like your answer. Because there is no right answer. It depends on your mood, the day, how you were feeling.
Depends on your mood. Right now, I've got some MF Doom and Jay Dilla on the wall, but
MF Doom, huh?
Yesterday it was Hall & Oates and Janet Jackson. So
yeah, well, I like it that you have some diversity in your style and your taste. And if anybody out there in the audience, you have some favorite albums, put them in the chat. And also, if you have something you want to chime in, you got something you really want to talk about, feel free to request a call in or ask a question in the chat if you want. Okay, so moving forward, before we get to the book, some of I saw some of snippets of a couple live videos you did recently with regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict, and for me, it's real esoteric, because I grew up in Utah, so I didn't have a lot of Jewish folks around, so I didn't even really understand the concept, growing up. Even today, I'd have to really think about it. And so it's esoteric in everything that's happened in the Middle East. I even see your brother, some of the commentary that he has, which I appreciate, but it's over my head to a large degree, if that makes sense. And so I was just wondering, I feel like that you were putting a touch of humanity from what I heard you say, and I was wondering if you could just, share whatever you want. Give us some insight into what you think about it.
yeah, so look, where do you even start, right? And I think when I start talking about it, I get into my own perspective on it and my views, which are pretty strong and specific and kind of developed over the 35 years that I've been paying attention to this conflict since I was a teenager. But let me start with the most general level, which I think hopefully no one can disagree with, which is that it's just a colossal tragedy of what's going on. And that's a generic thing to say, but it's also true, and it hurts the human heart to see people locked in this kind of cycle, to see people suffering and terrified and grieving and angry and lost. And that's about as much as I can say neutrally, because the minute you start going beyond that, now you have to talk about the specifics of the situation. And this kind of holding space for the humanity of everyone involved is good. But I can't stop there because I know too much about the situation, And I see it a particular way. And as I've said in my Instagram lives, I've been immersed in this much of my life. I went to a Zionist summer camp. Zionist just means, in the Jewish context, the belief that we should have a state of our own and that state should be the state of Israel, and that gives Israel certain rights to this and that, the belief that a Jewish state is the most important thing. And I grew up going to a summer camp and actually even being a leader in a summer camp that taught that, And I went to Hebrew school where we were taught the Israeli point of view, chapter and verse. And then I've done other reading that's brought me around to a position that says, there's a lot more to the picture than that. So based on that, I see the current situation, and this is not to justify anything. I'm not interested in moral justifications for individual actions. I want to look at systems. I want to look at the context in which things happen. And the context, the largest context I can look at it in terms of, it's not a religious war. It's not Jews versus Muslims. First of all, there's many Palestinians who are Christian too, but that's beside the point. It's not a religious war. This is a war over land and over rights and over justice and injustice. And I think the most relevant context to place everything in is the Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which has been in place since 1967. And then of course, the minute you say that, there's all kinds of more minute details like, well, didn't Israel withdraw in 2005? And I would say, well, actually no, maybe cosmetically yes, but technically no, or functionally no. But see, even the minute I open that can of worms, now I'm going on down that rabbit hole, and it's going to get above people's heads again. So people can go look at my brother's reporting, Aaron Maté on Substack and at the Gray Zone. You can look at my Instagram lives if you want more details, and there's lots of other people who are even more well-informed than us. Although I don't know if I'd put anyone more informed than my brother. He's pretty well read on this stuff. But the point is, there's been an uninterrupted pattern of domination and oppression by a powerful country over a people that have very little power. That's the simplest context I can put it in. And when it comes to the Gaza Strip, we're talking about an open-air prison, or what an Israeli sociologist once called the largest concentration camp ever to exist on Earth. So I feel like those are the facts that I have to start from, because they're just so irrefutable, and they're so huge, and they're so consequential. Everything that happens, like that state of affairs, is going to have a series of consequences, and we are living those consequences. Whatever you want to say about the brutal attack that Hamas perpetrated against Israel and killed a lot of innocent civilians, it's terrible. It's horrible. And it was a brutal jailbreak from a brutal imprisonment that's been going on for a long time, and that every single one of those people who committed those heinous acts were born in that prison camp and had never left it, because they can't. So that's, for me, the starting place in terms of putting it in a context. And I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback, including from people who find it really hard to hear because they sympathize with Israel and with Israelis. Mm-hmm. I've gotten some angry feedback. People don't want to hear it. People who think I'm, mistakenly blaming Israelis, blaming the victim or justifying this or that. I'm not justifying anything. I'm trying to understand why things happen in a larger context, which in some ways is analogous to what we do in the myth of normal. What's the larger context for these disturbing things we're seeing? It's not whose fault is it, but what's the larger context? And besides the fact that I happen to be living in one country and from another country, both of which are giving their uncritical support to Israel, militarily, financially, and crucially, diplomatically. Joe Biden is in Israel right now saying Israel's done nothing wrong, and though we care about Palestinian lives, this is what you get when you mess with Israel, basically, is what he's saying. He's giving them the green light. So given that I'm from these countries, and Canada and the United States, that call themselves democratic, well, if they're democratic, then it's the place of their citizens to speak first and foremost about what we can do about it and what we are doing about it, which is making it worse. So this is where I position myself as a Jew, as a North American, and as a human being. And I've just been, I'm glad you say that it feels like I'm humanizing it, because I'm not coming at it as some kind of credentialed expert. I just know some things. And I think there's a lot that goes on where people can end up feeling, I don't have the right to speak about it. I'm not an expert. And that, there's people who benefit from, not people, there there are narratives that benefit from other people feeling unqualified to speak on something that's happening in their world. You know, and I don't think anyone should feel so intimidated that they can't express an opinion. But yeah, if you're not sure about the facts, go do some research. Go look it up and look at a variety of voices.
You know, I think you said it perfectly. That's what you're doing when you're sharing your thoughts and your feelings about these things, is you're adding context. There is no, perfect truth for the matter. There's a context and a bunch of different contexts that we have to look at things through. And, it seems like in America or in the West or whatever, it doesn't seem like we're often divided, right, about whether it's a presidential candidate or left-right views. But even like Israel-Palestine kind of transcends the left-right somewhat. But why do you think it is that we're so far apart on so many issues? Whether we're talking about Donald Trump, some people say that he's the greatest person in the world. Some people say he's the devil. But then I see the same thing with Joe Biden. You either can only praise him or you can only criticize him. And then the same thing, and I haven't been, I'm so busy right now. I haven't been following the Israel-Palestine conflict recently, to the level that some other people have. But still, what I see from other folks is this huge divide where nobody wants to listen to the other. I shouldn't say nobody, but many folks don't want to listen to the others, to another perspective, another context. Why do you think we're like that? How do you think we got here to that in America, to where we can't take in another context, we can't listen to another's perspective, we can't look inward and challenge our own views and our own beliefs?
Well, that's such a huge and profound question. I would really take some reflection on my part. How did we get here? It's a cultural-wide phenomenon, which means it's not personal. I think it comes from different directions. It's certainly always been the case that from the point of view of the powers that be that create propaganda, they don't want people to be thinking critically. That's always been the truth. That's always been the way it is. And whatever the government is doing, whether it's economic policy or, like what we're spending money on and not spending money on, whether we're spending money on locking poor people up for using mild drugs that slightly alleviate the misery of living in and the alienation of living in the system that the powers that be have created. And when I say powers that be, people shouldn't hear this as some kind of conspiracy theory. There's just certain powerful sectors in our society: the military-industrial complex, the banks, big pharma, the media. Like this, it doesn't take a conspiracy theory to point out that certain groups benefit. And when I say groups, I just mean sectors of the economy. I'm not talking about this religion or that kind of people or whatever. It's not about that. It's about, as Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. So the sectors of society that benefit from things being exactly the way things are, well, it's inconvenient to them if people start questioning the way things are. So there's always been a propaganda effort, whether that's the latest U.S. war abroad, from Korea to Vietnam to Iraq to whatever, or policy towards Israel. So that's just always been the case. I do think things have been accelerating in terms of the inability to have dialogue with people in the past 10 years, let's say. Certainly, in the last 20, with the consolidation of media, right? Matt Taibbi wrote a great book about this called Hate Inc., just about how the different media companies, Fox, MSNBC, they all benefit from a polarized environment because now they have their siloed audience and the other ones has theirs, and dividing and conquering, right? People blaming each other. You're always going to tune in for red meat it's a lot more. You can do a lot more impulse buying and impulse clicking when you're doing it from a place of rage and reaction and emotion than when you're thoughtfully looking for a nuanced perspective, right? So you can pander to people's emotions that way, and people are hurting. People are hurting deep down. And the media and politicians know how to play to that. And I would say specifically, you mentioned Donald Trump. In the past 10 years, Trump is the most polarizing figure in American politics since, I don't know, Joseph McCarthy or something. And I would say that both sides have used his presence to exacerbate a culture war, which is now about what kind of person are you? Are you a good person? Are you a bad person? If you're a right-winger, you might say, do you love America or do you hate America? If you're a Democrat or a liberal, you might say, do you love democracy or do you hate democracy? These big, blanket, kind of meaningless litmus tests. And now Trump is the dividing line. And then, of course, COVID came along, and all of the differences in the ways people reacted to the reaction to COVID got glommed onto this existing culture war between Trump people and non-Trump people or anti-Trump people. So now science is becoming politicized. And you have to stick to what your tribe is doing, what your team is saying. And this is as true from, and I come from the liberal side of the tracks. That's generally speaking my people. I'm in musical theater in New York City. I grew up in a liberal Jewish sector of Canadian society, but it's as true for, quote, my side of the tracks as it is for the conservative side of the tracks. Just you see families breaking apart. People can't even talk to each other anymore because so-and-so voted for Trump. Never mind the fact that there are plenty of people who voted for Obama twice and then voted for Trump. And they would have voted for Bernie had he been the alternative. So it doesn't even break down along left and right lines. It breaks down along which team are you a part of. One of my favorite podcasters, Matt Chrisman from Chapo Trap House, who is currently recovering in the hospital from a pretty serious medical situation, but I hear he's doing well, which is good to hear. But he once said it's basically the dividing line is between people who went to certain kinds of colleges and certain people who didn't. So it's either the don't be a pussy party or don't be an asshole party, which is a very crude way of putting it. But the Democrats are the don't be an asshole party. Be nice to people, be virtuous, so on and so forth. And Trump is bad and mean and all that. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, the Democrats, meanwhile the conservative side is don't be a softie, don't be a sissy, be strong, stand up for America, all this kind of stuff. It's not very intellectually sophisticated, is it? It's very libidinal. It's very stimulus response. Choose your side, and then, and so there's just which of course leads to all kinds of weird, and now we're turning this into a politics conversation, but you get me started, this is what happens. It used to be a liberal democratic perspective to be against war.
Right.
But because of the whole Trump-Russia thing, where Democrats needed to believe that Trump was elected because of the Russians, as opposed to the fact that maybe people were sick and tired of the Democrats or didn't think Hillary was a good candidate. But because they pushed that line, now that Joe Biden is being strong against Russia, now supporting a foreign war is the liberal thing to do. It's crazy. It used to be the left-wing thing to do, to be anti-war. So it isn't about left-right anymore. It's about establishment versus not trusting the establishment, asking questions, and looking at larger context. And that's a hard perspective to keep up because we're so flooded with a trauma exploitative perspective that says there's good guys and there's bad guys. And it keeps us away from looking at how power works and all kinds of other stuff. Now, look, you could agree with me on that and still completely disagree with my worldview on a whole bunch of other things. So what do I know? But that's how I would answer that question, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's actually a good topic for social workers because I think one of the flaws of social work collectively is that often it's taken, politics are taken for granted. I think I've been in several events where, like a social work event where the speaker or whoever's sharing, assumes that everybody in the audience or in the group shares their politics, which is usually democratic politics and social work for the most part. But I like what you said about the democratic side is don't be an asshole, because from where I see it, from a distance, a lot of what Trump said, the Democrats didn't like because he said it like he was an asshole. I'll build the wall, goddammit, and the Mexicans will pay for it, and
That's
whatever.
right.
That's one example. But now Biden's building a wall, and he's just being nicer about it, and it's okay.
100%. And quite personally, I'd rather, if you're going to be an asshole, just come out and be that. Just be it.
Yeah, I'm
like
with you.
I find the hypocrisy and the sanctimony much more disgusting than, and this was the thing. Trump, the real reason, I mean, look, a lot of really well-meaning liberals had their heart broken because they really identified Hillary Clinton with the advent of a progressive new world where women can be powerful and compassion and whatever. Never mind the fact that none of her policies have ever been compassionate. She helped start a civil war in Libya and destroyed that country, and she's the one who bragged about Gaddafi. We came, we saw, he died. Chuckle, chuckle, chuckle. But for whatever reason, people associated her with a kinder, more progressive, the kind of America we aspire to, And then Trump comes along, and he's this bully and this blackguard and this misogynist, just chauvinist, And all of those things are true about him. He is those things. But the real reason that the Democratic Party and the whole liberal class couldn't stand Trump was that he was an ill-suited, unbecoming spokesperson for the empire. You can have all these policies, just don't be so damn blunt about it. Mm-hmm. You notice that AOC hasn't been down to the border crying about what she's seeing, the kids in cages, since Biden took power. When Trump was in power, it was all tears. So there's just a tremendous amount, and you can pick your poison, and that's fine. If you want to be more offended by these Republicans, there's plenty to be offended by. Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley and Marco Rubio are issuing some of the most psychotic statements about Palestine right now that I've ever heard any politician make, including any Israeli politician. Just absolutely bonkers. And they're nuts about everything, China, all this kind of stuff, right? But you can pick your poison. I would prefer that than people who co-opt the noble history of left-wing struggles for justice and peace and equality to whitewash and pinkwash and wokewash the Democrats continuing the exact same destructive policies. And that just bothers me more. But you're not supposed to, you're not supposed to be able to criticize the Democrats from the left. They're supposed to represent the absolute furthermost social justice-y extreme, which is crazy because they don't.
Yeah, it seems like, I've used this a few times, but to get biblical, it's the political parties or the politics in America, it basically goes along the theme of, hey, you got a plank in your eye. No, you asshole, you have a plank in your eye, and nobody ever looks in the mirror. And if we had some self-reflection on either side of the aisle or both sides or, whatever, if they were more reflective on what they could do to be better themselves and to be better as a party or whatever, then we might make some progress. But it's always that the other guy's the asshole, the other guy's the one that's ruining it for us. And if you just stick with us, it'll all get better, but it's mostly the same.
Yeah.
Well, let's get off the politics for a little bit. We've touched on that enough. We might have people slandering us pretty soon if we keep at it.
I should hope so.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm in a new office, and I only have a few books that I've managed to carry up all these stairs so far, but one of them is The Myth of Normal. And one thing you might say is, isn't that thing supposed to have this fancy red cover? And I always try to take a few digs where I can at my partner, my wife, Alicia, and whenever I have a book that I like and I pass it on to her, it's never the same when I get it back. Somehow I'm able to read the book and it looks pretty much the same, maybe a little bit more used, but when I get it back from her, it's missing the cover. If it's a paperback, it looks like it's been all the way around the world 3 times.
Oh, come on, man. That cover's a work of art. She's taking it, she's going to turn it into something beautiful.
I hope so. She is an artist.
You got the black pilled version. You got like the
yeah.
You got the dark version of Myth of Normal right there.
It's funny too. I had I don't do it anymore because it started costing me too much. But when I first started this podcast, I would send everybody a gift, and I sent one of my guests this book, and I just ordered it from Amazon. And when it got delivered, it was like a giant textbook with large words. So I don't know where the hell that came from, but somehow there's another version of it that's like a giant textbook.
Maybe
but one of the
people with visual impairments.
Yeah, something. I don't know how I managed to order that thing, but I want to I want to talk, before we get into some of the details maybe about how the book came about and whatnot, I want to turn to all the way to the end of the book, and if you have it, it's on page 4. If anybody in the audience has it, it's on page 440 of the hardcover. But Daniel, you have a part in here, and when I read it, it really touched me. Just to give a little background, on myself, I grew up like most of my life thinking I was cursed, that there was something wrong with me, that the way I felt, cursed is the best word. I felt like I was cursed. And I had, extreme cases of highs and lows where I'd feel really great sometimes, and other times I'd feel terrible. I'd wake up and have no energy. And my perspective and the way I've looked at this has changed, constantly over the last, 10, 15 years or so. But when I read this little excerpt right here, it really touched me. And so I'm just going to read it if that's okay. And then maybe you can comment on it if you want, Daniel, or give us a little background. But it says, being diagnosed in 2019 with cyclothelioma, is that what it is?
Cyclothymia.
Cyclothymia. Basically a mild form of bipolar disorder, was huge for me. Something about my life became coherent when I realized the crazily productive streaks and depressive crashes aren't really opposites, more like conjoined twins, and that both have been trying to help me get through the world since childhood. The can't stop, won't stop mode is a little boy's brain in overdrive, trying to keep up and cut through the noise around him, while the emotional collapse is like a breaker switch installed to prevent my fuse box from exploding. Thanks in part to the mood stabilizers I take, there's now someone home between them, observing the ups and downs, knowing they're not me. Now, anytime I find myself in a turbo mode, all insomniac inspiration, or when I wake up feeling heavy and reluctant, I don't fight it or sweat it. Both states come bearing gifts. On the one hand, exhilaration and creative flow. On the other, the gift of rest, of embracing my limitations. Neither one ever takes over for long. It's a big deal, I'm finding, to know that your mind is not always your enemy. Like I said, I really appreciated that. It really touched me. It might have brought a little tear to my eyes when I was reflecting afterwards. So I was just wondering if you could add some context to that and maybe share a story, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I mean, the larger context is that this book is about the thesis of the book. Excuse me. It kind of goes in two directions. On the one hand, we're saying that the things that are taken to be normal in our society are neither natural nor healthy, because our society is not set up to promote the human needs that are expressions of our natural nature. The flip side of that is that a lot of the things we take to be so-called abnormal, including many of the diseases that we're seeing rises of, the physical ones, many different kinds of conditions, and we question the notion of disease actually itself, but also many of the mental so-called disorders, from depression to bipolar to schizophrenia to, and then addiction, which has got some kind of mental illness component, it's like sort of where physical and mental meet. Far from being strange genetic diseases or mysterious where did that come from mysteries, these are all normal reactions to an abnormal human life lived, and in the larger context of a society that doesn't help parents provide what their kids actually need. Meaning that underneath all we're saying, but you could say most mental illness, there's an attempt at a coping mechanism. There's something that happened inside that brain to try and adjust to a completely unnatural, unexpected, and overwhelming set of circumstances. This goes back all the way to my dad's first book, Scattered Minds on Attention Deficit Disorder, where the key thesis was that it's not a genetic disease, it's a coping mechanism. It's the mind tuning out. What kind of reality does a mind have to tune out from? Well, it's when it's too overwhelming, which is a combination of stress and sensitivity. The sensitivity is inborn. The stresses are external. You put those two things together, you're going to get a brain that, to protect itself from overwhelming pain and grief and despair, might tune out when things get, and then it doesn't know, and then it never learns how to tune in. It can't control it later. It's a question of brain development. So in the case of my bipolarity, which is, is a mild form of bipolar, if someone told me that you have a genetic disease called bipolar, that would seem very strange to me. No one in my family has it. But even if they did, it would seem strange to me. But the minute that this psychiatrist said to me, has anyone ever suggested to you that you might be somewhere on the bipolar spectrum? My entire life clicked into focus for me. I saw the larger context in a much clearer way all of a sudden, because I'd always thought, I'm just, I've got so much potential if it wasn't for these dang depressions that come along every few years. Which makes no sense. But when I start to, it doesn't make as much sense to me as, wait a minute. The ups and the downs are part of an instability. Because I get lost in the ups just as surely as I get lost in the downs. And I need the ups with a kind of desperation that only someone who doesn't have a stable center would need. Which means I get over-attached to the up periods, which means that they're going to crash all the harder when they expire. And that's the pattern that's always happened. Now that tracks with my childhood, actually. Things were always either really amazing or just really terrible, and they could switch on a dime. And my little brain had to go into overdrive to keep up with it as a way to try and stabilize itself, which is a need of ours. And if we don't get stability from the outside, we have to provide it from the inside, which we can do, but at a cost. So I was trying to highlight that for me, learning that I'm on the bipolar spectrum wasn't an, oh my God, it turns out I'm really mentally ill. Like, it wasn't bad news. It was good news. Not because I now have an excuse for everything or I can explain everything in terms of that, but because I can understand the difficulties I've had inside of that framework and say, of course I ended up with a brain that works that way. And it turns out that there's a medication that really helps me. That's not true for everybody, because not every issue can be ameliorated with medication. Now, nothing can be cured or healed with medication. That's the thing. I take a pill. Here it is. You reading it just reminded me that I still haven't taken it today. Sometimes I forget. But this pill does not heal my trauma. It doesn't even reprogram my nervous system. It just gives me some scaffolding or some planks above the quicksand on which I can stand to do that work. So if it had just been oh great, I get to take a pill for the rest of my life, that wouldn't have been much of that would have been good, I guess, but there's not much inspiration for me in that. The inspiring thing is, wait a minute, I can get some breathing space from the worst of it so that I can stand where I am and learn to have a better, kinder, saner relationship with myself, which is what healing is.
Yeah, well, you say that the medication doesn't heal the trauma. Do you think trauma can be healed, or do you think that there's a healing process? And what does that look like? Is that extra work that you do in addition to medication?
Yeah, it's got to be extra. Or the medication has to be seen as part of a larger thing. It's not separate, but it's not all of it. Can trauma be healed? Well, I think we have to be careful here, because it's easy to go all the way to the other end and get into a kind of almost a sort of capitalist conception of healing. It's like if you just do enough work and apply yourself to it, you're going to heal it and it's going to be gone. I don't know about that. What does trauma mean? It means a wound. Wounds can get healed, yes. Usually wounds don't heal entirely. There's always some residue. I broke my elbow 13 years ago, and I had surgery, and there's a scar, which is not a big deal. Not my elbow, my wrist, sorry, my scaphoid. There's a scar, But more than that, when I play guitar for too long, I actually feel a tension in that wrist that wouldn't be there if I hadn't had that. So it still flares up. It's still there. Has it healed? Yeah, it's healed. But it still has the power to affect me. And so I don't think we help ourselves when we create this standard of it's going to be completely healed someday. We say in the book that healing is not a destination, it's a direction on a map. So I don't know if wounds can be healed, but we can be healing. Healing just means moving towards wholeness. It's a movement towards reconnecting with the parts of ourselves we got disconnected from. And even a slight movement in that direction is a victory.
Yeah,
so I just think it's easy to turn healing into a kind of goal or sweet by and by of we'll get there someday, as opposed to like, am I in the process of reconnecting with myself now? If I am, then I'm healing. Will I ever be healed? I don't know. I feel like you are healed is what I hear faith healers say when they smack people on the forehead and, you know, tell them they can walk again or something like that. That's not what we're doing here.
Yeah, and I like that what both you and Alicia said in the chat, that it's a, you know, healing is it's a direction and not a destination. Another thing that was presented in the book, and I can't remember exactly how it was stated, but something along the lines that, you know, a lot of people look at trauma as something that, you know, you say you go through this event as a child or combat or something like that, and that's the traumatic event is what happens to you, and that's the trauma. But I think the book says something about it's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of experiencing the event. Can you talk a little bit about that and, you know, kind of contextualize trauma?
How big is hockey up in Alaska? Ice hockey must be big.
Big, as big as it can be. Yeah.
Right. So the way I worded it in the book, and this was I think this is in the book. If not, I've said it many times since. It's not the illegal cross-check to the head. It's the concussion. You know, it's not the car crash. It's the whiplash. That one even rhymes. Car crash, whiplash. That's good. That's even catchier. So wound trauma is what lasts, not what happened, which is why you don't have to have been raped as a child to be traumatized. I mean, if you were, that's a pretty guaranteed predictor of trauma. But even that, it wasn't the event itself, although that might have left physical nervous system scars. But what goes along right with it is a disconnection from the self, the numbing out, the self-hatred, the long-term consequences that are separate from, but emanate kind of almost inevitably from the initial damage. That's what's going to need to be healed more and more down the line. Your ability to trust, your ability to connect to what's going on in your own body. That's the longer term trauma. And that kind of trauma can be induced by much less intense or extreme events. Trauma can be sustained, wounding can be sustained by bad things that happen, but also by good, necessary things that didn't happen. When we're children, we're still developing, which means we need things, and not getting them is like an assault on our systems. So if that's kind, loving attention, especially when we're hurting, when we're upset, or when we're vulnerable, well, if we don't have to get smacked around to feel slapped in the face. And I'm not trying to minimize the experience of people who do get smacked around, because that's, in some ways, that's unlike anything. But trauma can be sustained in all kinds of situations. I was only hit in the face once by my father, and it did leave a mark, but that wasn't what left the biggest mark. What left the biggest mark was the belief that I took on that I'm all alone, because it happened in front of the entire family, the entire extended family, at his birthday once, when I wouldn't sing happy birthday to him at age 3. So yeah, the hit, that hurts. But if it had just been that out of the blue, that could actually have been repaired to a large extent. But the trauma is, now Daniel's going around life believing that he has to be really, on everyone's good side in order to not get hit. Or he needs to always have his fists up to defend himself, have his words ready so he won't get hit. Or, and underneath all that, I'm all alone. That's the core story. Now, none of that happened. I'm all alone didn't happen. That was a story that got played out inside my head, a belief that my nervous system took on. It is true that no one was able to intervene on my behalf. What's not true is I'm all alone. But that's what I'm going to believe, and that's what I'm going to act as if it's true. Well, that's an expression of the core wound that I sustained in that moment. A fracturing, a cutting off between me and a sense of belonging, and a sense of trust, and a sense of being enough in myself. So, I forgot what your question even was, but these kinds of wounds are sustained in all different kinds of ways. And another running theme of the myth of normal is that they become very difficult to spot later in life because people learn to cope with them in ways that help them succeed in life and that people admire and praise. Mm-hmm. So that some of the things that you might consider your greatest strengths were actually forged in the fires of Mordor, you know? Or Mordor.
Yeah, it's true. Just as somebody who's been in social work for, a couple of decades now, a lot of the kids that I've worked with, I think a good example is you take, say, a divorce. And for one kid, a divorce may even be seen as a positive thing or even neutral, or that doesn't bother them that much, depending on the context. But for another kid in a different situation, or, maybe they're different, it can be an extremely traumatizing event for them that can affect them for years, and they can have repercussions that they're not even aware of. So I like that you put it, a lot of the ways that you put it. I want to circle around and look at the book as a whole. I don't want to ask too much about the stuff you got going on with your father, because Minnie wants to ask you about that. But how did the book, I guess it's a two-part question. How did the book come about? Like, how did the idea come about, and what led to its, to its creation? And then just a personal question from me, how is it discussing such things in the public realm, your family, your own life, looking inward, because that's not the norm of, if we're going to go that way, that's not the norm in today's world. So how has that been for you? Has that added to the healing? Has it been conflicting at all, or has it stressed you out? How's that been? So the development of the book, how'd that come about, and then how's it been to discuss these things in the public realm?
Would you mind if I took the second question first?
Sure.
I like discussing it in the public realm. It suits me. Both my dad and I are pretty public people. That's one thing we have in common. We're very different, but we have that in common, that somehow working out difficult things out loud is a skill of ours. And it's a gift of ours, and it's where we feel comfortable. So it's no skin off my back to be working this stuff out in the public domain. Now, I know that's weird for people to hear, because to them, that like they would rather be shot in the face 17 times than have to like be publicly vulnerable with one of their parents, Mm-hmm. And I get it. But for me, like this is not true of everyone in my family, but it definitely suits an aspect of the family culture very well. So it doesn't feel like a stretch. And it can be a little confusing because my dad and I can't work our stuff out in public. We can bring some of the stuff we're working through to the public, and but we have to be careful to make sure that we don't get our public personas confused with who we are just for each other in private. But that's just true of anyone in the public domain doing anything related to family or related. You don't want to get too identified with your public persona. If people know you from the outside, you start seeing yourself through other people's eyes, and you lose touch with yourself. And we've all seen what happens to lots of people in that scenario. But as far as, what's it like having it happen in public? If you had told me when I was 10 years old, there we are, let's say that you came and visited me at age 10, and we're sitting around the dinner table with my family, and I'm sitting there grinding my teeth or arguing with my parents or shaking my head because of just stuff I'm seeing around the table, and the vibes and the dynamics and all of my hurt feelings and all this kind of stuff. And someone whispers in my ear, ear says, "Hey Daniel, guess what? You know, when you're 48 years old, you'll get to do this. The entire world will get to see this, and it'll be of benefit to the world. And you guys will actually be getting along. But some of the quirky dynamics are going to be kind of exposed, and you'll get to be yourself and tell your point of view to the world, and you'll get paid for it." I would have been like, "Okay, good deal. I'm in. I can hang out until then." There's a part of me that appreciates the chance to make things public. Not because it's an expose, but because it helps me step back from it and say, oh, this is a universal dynamic, and we're just one example of it. And I get a lot of, I don't know, I get a certain amount of stability and support from knowing that people can relate to what I'm saying. And they can also relate to what my dad's saying. It's none of this is about one point of view versus another. And that people find value in seeing a father and a son collaborating. That's cool. We do have this special skill set, these two personalities that happen to be good at and somehow on some level enjoy working things out in public, so I'm glad it's of service. It's just not the whole thing. It can't be the whole thing. So does that answer your second question?
Yeah.
So then to the first question then, it came about because my dad had been trying to write this book for 6 or 7 years by the time I came aboard, and he was failing miserably. And this he'll tell you this much. You know, he had already sent back the money for the Canadian advance on the book, which was a large sum of money. But he said, I can't do this. I can't do this. He had tried. He had already interviewed hundreds of people. He had 20,000 articles filed in folders on his computer, all the research, you know, but he just couldn't figure out a way to bring it all together. He had a title he didn't like. And finally, in 2018, he shared his latest book proposal with me, and he was kind of at his wit's end. And my mom had told him that she hated the proposal, not because of the material, just because of the tone and the length of it, and she just sounded too dense. You know, and I read it, and I was like, "Yeah, Dad, this is going to be a great book, but you need my help to do it because we really need to transform the way the story's being told, and I have an idea of how to do it." And he said, "I was hoping you would say that," and that was it. I was aboard. You know, and we wrote the book proposal together in the aftermath of that. It was a joint book proposal actually for The Myth of Normal plus the next one we're doing, Hello Again. And it went really well. So we knew that we could collaborate on a book proposal, which meant that collaborating on the book was going to work. And it did. Overall, it was very, very smooth. Not always. It took some time to figure out how to work together. But I'd say that on the whole, it was meant to be, and it worked out really well. And he's been very generous in his acknowledgments publicly, both in the book and in his interviews, just of how crucial the collaboration was for him. So that makes me really happy too.
Yeah, one thing I've always appreciated about your father is this level of honesty and, you know, taking accountability and reflecting on his own, you know, behavior and his own, you know, life experiences and whatnot, especially regarding his children. So I've always respected about him before I even knew who you were. Mm-hmm. You already kind of touched on this.
Let me say something about that too. That's another reason why it's nice to finally have a public platform of my own to speak about it, because he has been speaking about his parenting for so long. And on the one hand, yeah, it's really nice that he's contrite and thoughtful and, you know, remorseful about the ways in which not that I need him to be remorseful, but it is nice to have a parent who can reflect on their own mistakes. People say that must be nice. It is nice. At the same time, when that parent is doing so publicly, and I'm going through my Instagram feed and, you know, reels are coming up of my dad talking about the time he hit me, at a certain point you get to be like, well, let me tell my own story.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's good for me to be able to just tell it in my own words.
Yeah, and it goes. You already touched on it a little bit, but Eunice asked in the chat, has it been healing for you?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's been pro-healing. It's been on the side of healing. It gives me a fuller sense of myself, a fuller sense of confidence. It's also, I mean, very much the collaboration between my dad and I has been healing for our relationship in the sense that if I'm going to make the biggest contribution to him, he has to learn to listen to me and trust me in a way he never has before. And I have to learn to trust myself and be kind to him in a way that I never have before, because it just doesn't work otherwise. And being a musical theater writer, I know about how collaboration works. And it's everything. And it takes a certain degree, which means we have to kind of level up. And part of what healing is bringing things into the present moment, because when we're dealing with trauma, it's all memory, it's all repetition. When we're in the present moment and things are fresh and we're actually being who we are right now, then there's no healing to do because we're here. And we simply can't work together if we're going to stay mired in old stuff. Even if we're talking about old stuff, we have to be approaching it in a fresh way. So this entire thing, and then getting to come on here and talk about it, yes, it's a part, it had healing value for me, which doesn't mean I recommend it to everybody. You're going to have different ways of, but for most people, going out and writing a book with your parents, I wouldn't say try this at home. But for me, it's been just the same.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very unique situation to have both the parent and the child as adults that are willing to engage in a reflective, critical way. And so kudos to you all for setting a good example for doing that, because you doing it, kind of liberates other folks to be willing to do it as well. And so I'm excited I haven't looked into the Hello Again very much at all, but I look forward to the book. I've looked forward to all of your father's books. And I'm not going to talk about that too much because, like I said, Minnie had something, tongue twister. Minnie wanted to talk to you about it. But I was wondering, just curious, how long did it take to, from the time you started working on that book to the time it was in the, in the bookstore?
3 years and 3 months.
Is it hard to wait for it to come out?
Yeah, at certain points.
Yeah. When's the Hello Again one coming out?
Well, that depends on when we finish writing it, but it's supposed to be out in 2025.
And is it going to be written similar to this one, or like more of a dialogue, or what's that going to look like?
It'll be different. I mean, first of all, you look on the cover of this one, and it's Gabor Maté with Daniel Maté, and Daniel Maté is in a smaller font. In this case, it'll be probably, I don't know, Daniel and Gabor Maté if we do it alphabetically, because it's a 50-50.
Yeah.
So the writing process is different. I'm doing a lot more of the initial writing. I'm a lot more involved with the research and the interviews of people. And as far as the voice of the book itself, if I have my way, it's going to have a lot more of our individual voices in it. It'll definitely have some sections that's like us or we, but we're channeling a workshop we've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years, and we don't stand up there on stage and read a script together in unison. That's number one. Number two, we don't see everything the exact same way on this topic, nor should we. And number three, what are we trying to model here? It's called a fresh start for parents and their adult children. Well, a fresh start doesn't mean you're both going to see things exactly the same way. It's about two different adult voices standing next to each other and being in relationship with each other. So I think that one way of modeling that will be to have our individual voices distinct. So I think there'll be a lot of that in the book too. I'm going to put myself on mute and take a quick bathroom break, if that's okay.
Yeah, right on.
This is live radio, folks. I'll be right back.
No worries. While Daniel's gone, those of you in the audience, I know I've said this already before, but it's a good time to put in any questions that you have. I know there's the call-in feature. Make sure you tell us I think it gives you a little prompt to let us know what you want to talk about. And when Daniel comes back, I'll turn it over to you, Minnie. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, it's been a great conversation so far. I always say this over and over again, but if the time goes by fast, it's a good dialogue. If it goes by slow, it means it was kind of tedious. We can look through some of the chats. Eunice had asked if cyclothymia was in the DSM, and Alicia confirmed that it is.
The majority of the new diagnoses are in the DSM-5, 14, 15, yeah. And I did come across it when I was, scrolling through that.
Hi, I'm back.
Hey, Daniel. Well, we're going to turn it over to Minnie. She's going to talk to you for a little bit, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely. Now things are about to get the real tough questions come.
Okay. Well,
Enough of this. These softballs.
well, hello again. Just kidding. No.
Hi, Minnie.
Hi. So, you're touching base on everything that and Christian were talking about. And I just think something just came to my mind, and I was just burning to ask, when you're in that situation that you were with your father, and you think, I would take myself, for instance, my home situation wasn't so, what you call healthy, kind of like toxic, but I didn't know it wasn't healthy, because to me that's all I knew, and that's the norm, right? And I was kind of curious, and I'm pretty sure people on the podcast are curious of what um made you realize, oh, this is bothering me. There's something that happened to me, and how do I get help for it? Like, for instance, just take like a fever. You have a fever when you're burning up, right? And you're having like redness, like a wound, just like this redness. You're having a fever. Are just symptoms of
Yeah,
a fever,
you can see it.
right? It's just the symptoms of a fever. So I was just kind of curious as to when did you realize, oh, maybe this did affect me in my life, whatever happened with your father? And when did you want to go back and oh, I need help, or I need, to go ahead and look at
Sure.
this, because I was just kind of curious.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that, it's a great question. I relatively had a very easy time identifying that things had wounded me and that I needed help. Because I grew up in a family where, for all the damage that was done, there was also a lot of vocabulary to talk about it. I mean, literally, during the years that my parents were doing things that would leave marks on my psyche for years, they were also reading books about how to raise liberated kids. And they were trying to, and my dad was always interested in this stuff. So, and even at age 9 or 10, my dad would say things like, well, you're having problems at school because of the way you were parented. And so, which was kind of confusing in its own way. But I didn't have to wait until I was a grown up to start thinking, hey, maybe, I knew, plus I just knew from my own experience how unhappy I could be in that house. So, and I was just the kind of kid who couldn't hide it, So I'm not sure that my own experience of coming to the awareness is a great prototype for other people, because I was aware of it so young. But I will say that you can take any kind of chronic disturbance of your mental or physical peace and wellness and ask the question, might this be connected to something from my childhood? And the answer will usually be yes, on some level. So I started having periodic depressions when I went to McGill, when I went to college. That was an expression of a lifelong emotional pattern that was now in my adulthood blooming. My difficulty in romantic, intimate relationships is one thing I could take a look at and say, okay, well, where did I learn this way of relating with people? It's not about finding excuses. It's about, again, looking at context and saying, where does this come from? I wasn't born this way. So for anyone else, I would say, it's tough to use my own self as an example. But anything that's stuck in your life, where you're like, anytime you find yourself asking, hey, why do I keep doing this? And you genuinely want to know, why do I keep doing this? Not to beat yourself up, but actually because you want to know. Why do I feel this way? Why can't I XYZ? Why do I always XYZ? These questions will usually lead you back to things you learned before you had any kind of choice in the matter. When your brain was developing, when your nervous system was developing. And if you read The Myth of Normal, you'll find all kinds of reasons why physical ailments can also be a clue. So someone with a cancer diagnosis, someone with a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease, which are going way, way up, especially for women, MS, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, all of these kinds of things. People have used these kinds of calamities as a moment to stop and say, wait a minute, what is my body expressing here? And when they took even a modest look, they find their body is expressing something about their biology is expressing their biography. So really, I would say, just like you said, with a fever, there are signs like redness, heat, sweating, shivering, all that kinds of stuff. We have to get more sensitive to the signs that are already showing themselves in our lives, the things that disturb our peace, the things that take us away from who we want to be. Addiction is a great glaring neon sign saying there's pain here. Really, all we're looking for is pain that hasn't been seen or acknowledged or understood, because it's going to come out and express itself in any which way. And it's going to take the courage to question the things we've taken to be normal. So probably the people who will have the hardest time are people who, A, believe they had a happy childhood. And they might have had an overall happy childhood. It doesn't mean that there weren't deep, deep wounds. And the people who are used to pushing away their anger and their sadness and their pain and being positive and being there for others and never letting them see you sweat and always showing up for others and never sweating the small stuff. And you get what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. There are certain kinds of personality types that people just think, well, that's just who I am. And that's what I meant by sometimes the strengths you prize the most in yourselves can be like superpowers. But of course, if you look at any superhero story, where does any superpower come from? It's always some tragic industrial accident or something like that. So there's always a tragic origin story. So anywhere you're overcompensating in adulthood or not being able to function in adulthood would be one way into asking the question, if you have a hard time asking it otherwise, where might I be carrying some wounds? And it's very, very important to put this in a larger context because it's not personal. Almost no one in this society escapes it. In certain cases, certain environments, the odds of it visiting people, certain kinds of people, raised disproportionately. I'm going to take a guess. Are you Indigenous from Alaska? Are you?
Yes.
You're Native American?
No.
Yeah.
I am.
What nation or what?
Sorry,
You
I'm
are
messing with
yeah.
you.
So,
Sorry. Yes.
yeah. So what tribe or nation are you a part of?
From the Eskimo, Southwest Alaska.
Okay, great. So that doesn't define everything about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Just because that's your lineage doesn't mean I can make every assumption about your upbringing or whatever. But it's enough to know that you come from a people that's been through some things that my people have not been through. My people went through some stuff your people haven't been through either, but on a different continent. But on this continent, and over the course of centuries, you're the recipient of a certain kind of lineage of stress and trauma. Just like an African American person living across the street from me here in Brooklyn is the recipient of a certain lineage of trauma. And so anyone growing up in those groups has even more obvious reason to ask, what might I have been the recipient of that wasn't mine and that I'm still carrying? But it doesn't spare white people either. It just takes different forms. So that we try to get into this in the book too. It's not all about race. It's not all about class, but it's not about it either. It was a long answer to your question.
Oh no, that was wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And a good friend of mine
Mm-hmm.
always like like when it came to my own personal life, and would ask the questions why they would do this. When you're dealing with a person who is not themselves healed, right? And you understand, why did they hurt you in the beginning? Why did I have to go through this? And my friend at the time, he was like, he's told me hurt people unknowingly or
Yep.
knowingly, and it like had to come to terms, and I'm pretty sure you did, like, oh, they're not ready, they're not healed yet, they're not ready to confront this yet in this context and all that. And also going back to the question, I just go hand in hand, like when you do go through your little episodes, and other than taking a pill, because that's not a cure for all, what other things like would you recommend people to do to help them go through whatever they were going through, to help them,
Mm.
you know, what you got respond to, let's say they go into an episode, right? What do they do? What do you do? And like, what would you recommend other people to do? Because there's so many ways people that can express themselves in a good manner, a unhealthy manner. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't presume to have one size fits all prescription for what people should do
Mm-hmm.
because people are going through so many different kinds of things. For instance, if you're going through a relapse of a serious fentanyl addiction, what I would recommend you do would be different than if you're going through a suicidal episode,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be different than I would recommend if you're having a mild depression, right? So there may be things you need to do in the immediate short term to reduce harm. I would say do those things. The only thing I can say in terms of generalities would be we all need things. We need connection with nature, and we benefit from it. We need connection with each other, and we strongly benefit from it. We need good food. We need rest. So reach out for what's nourishing. And then if you have access to the support in the form of therapy or counseling, so much the better. Our book has the entire section on healing, and really the principles of healing would be compassion and curiosity for yourself. But what can I say? I mean, people need people around them who will say, this too shall pass. It can be hard to say that to yourself. I could give you the script of what to say to yourself, but when you're in the crunch, when you're in those difficult times, try saying it and believing it. This is why we need other people. Yeah, I mean, going for walks helps me, but you got to find what helps you. Sometimes you just have to cope the best you can. There's been times when I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to try to help my depression right now. I'm just going to play Nintendo Switch for the next 48 hours.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be my form of quote unquote self-care. I'm not recommending that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that's what I've done. And sometimes we do what we do.
Oh, okay.
But ultimately, it has to be not about feeling better, but getting better at feeling.
I love that.
Feeling whatever's there. And creating contexts for ourselves in which it's safe to do so.
Oh, so that was beautifully said. I really love that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um,
great question.
so in your book, The Myth of the Normal, like, I know this is long, you said this long time coming, but how does this, so like, how did this whole thing come about? One day you're like, oh, Dad, you did this to me and that, right? Um, I was kind of curious, because like, did you one day say, Dad, all the stuff that you did to me as a young child that really hurt and all that, and how did the whole conversation start? Is what I'm asking about. And
Well, so that would be more about the second book, the Hello Again book, which hasn't been written yet.
mm,
Myth of Normal was not primarily about our relationship.
I'm sorry.
It was more, no, it's okay. I've already answered the question of how the myth of normal came about.
Yeah, I just wanted to know about the hello
Um,
again. That's what I was asking. Sorry about that.
yeah, well, how that came about was someone had seen us on stage together. We just happened to be on stage together for a few minutes somewhere, and she thought we made a good team, and she wanted to know if we wanted to do a workshop in Vancouver, and we could pick the topic. And I said, well, how about the relationship between parents and adult children? Because that's what it's about. It's not so much about parenting or childhood trauma as how are we supposed to deal with each other now? And I thought that was an interesting question that we might have something to offer about. So he liked it. And so we just kind of flew by the seat of our pants and did the first one. And that was in 2016. And it's just developed since then. Like I said, I didn't have to come to him with, you hurt me as a child. He told me I hurt you as a child. But he still told me that when I was a child, which was kind of hurtful. It's all very complicated. But, you know, this workshop came about when I was in my early 40s. So we just felt that it was a topic that needed to be explored, that not very many people were exploring, and that would be a little dangerous for us because we didn't know exactly what we would say about it. But we knew that it was worth saying. I admire him doing it because he's always seen as such an expert on so many different topics. And this is one topic that he'll admit. He might have some insights, but he's no expert. He's still figuring it out himself. And I was excited about that from the start, embodying something that we're not perfect at. Embodying the struggle, embodying the search, embodying the inquiry as we figure it out. Maybe going slightly ahead of people, navigating this new territory, but not saying that we have it perfectly figured out, and not waiting until we do, because we never will. So I know I'm scratching my nose a lot, which might look like I'm covering up for some sort of habit, but it's really just I've got an itchy nose. I think it's allergies.
Okay. Thank you. It's not your mustache skin.
Yeah, no, sometimes when I do interviews, the tip of my nose gets very, very itchy. I don't know. I got to look into that.
It's okay. And then, you talked about, doing this platforms with your dad. What are some key takes you hope the participants and listeners will gain from this? Like, what do you think would want them to benefit the most from you and your dad's, talk show?
I think the biggest thing would be to put their relationship difficulties with their parents or adult children in a bigger context so that they don't have to suffer about it as much. And hopefully, at best, see it in a new light where they see the possibility of something different, where they see it clearly in the present moment. And if you look at things clearly in the present moment, it doesn't mean you're not paying attention to the past. It doesn't mean you're ignoring the past. But it means that you're seeing the present moment as unfolding the way it of course would, given how the past was, but it doesn't mean that's how it has to be. If you have a different relationship with the past, then the future can be different. And so much of the time in these relationships, we get stuck in a point of view that leaves us no flexibility, no suppleness, no choice. We're just reacting. We make up our minds about each other, and we either blame ourselves or we blame the other person. Or we just throw up our hands and shrug our shoulders and say, it is what it is. I'll see you at Christmas. I'll see you at Thanksgiving. And the fact is, we can survive this relationship as it is. We don't need the relationship to change. No one needs this relationship to change. Because you're not parenting the kid anymore, and you're not being parented anymore. You're a grown-up. They're a grown-up. They're going to die someday, so are you. Let's just ride it out. That's why there are very few books on the topic. Ours is going to be one of the first. Because no one needs it. But the fact is, just because you don't need it doesn't mean you're not suffering the absence of it. And people are stressed the F out about this relationship all the time and complaining about it and grieving it. And I'm not going to say that healing your relationship with your kids or your parents is a crucial part of your healing, because your healing shouldn't depend on healing any relationship in the present. But the two are certainly mixed up with each other. And if you can at least have a different relationship to the relationship, never mind have a different relationship to the person. Maybe the person's dead. Maybe your parents are gone. The parents that abused you a long time ago, they're gone. Or the parents that you loved and you miss. But if you have a different relationship with their memory, if you have a different relationship with the relationship, then your life will be different. Because you'll tell a different story about yourself and you'll have a different experience of yourself. And so often the stories we get trapped inside of, whether it's the guilt of parents for how they quote unquote messed up their children, or the resentment, look at everything I did for you, and when is it enough, and so on and so forth. These stories, we seem to get stuck inside the least generous, least generative, least creative, most boring and irritated stories possible. That's why I do this thing called mental chiropractic, where I help people get unstuck from irritating stories they're stuck in. Really. People are irritated and stuck not by the situation, but by the stories that they can't help telling about the situation. And they don't know their stories. They think it's true. And it never is. What happened is what happened, but then there's all of the editorializing that we do in our minds about it, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So the number one thing I hope people would get is the freedom. It's all in the subtitle. A fresh start for parents and their adult children. Not a happy ending. Or even a clean slate. We're not promising those things. That's ridiculous. But a fresh start? Yeah. Starting from where we are. Looking at what's happened in a way that's more sober and more possibility filled. And then getting connected with our intentions as adults now. What do we actually want? What's important to us? And that doesn't mean you have to have a relationship with your adult kids, or you have to have a relationship with your parents now that you're grown up. You absolutely do not. And we are not. This is why I don't say my goal is for everyone to reunite and reconcile and be great. No, that might not be possible or even advisable for everybody. But if you're going to be estranged, what's the quality of your estrangement? So that's how I would answer that.
So I'm going back on this. I hear you say that basically overall, just for the person to get a better understanding of how they are and why they are the way they are, right? And kind of going back on this, reflecting with their parents, kind of help them figure out, whatever situation they're going through, this could possibly help them in their own little healing journey. And, thank you for responding to that. And going back to, take a walk with Daniel. Like, do you do that like like once a week, or like, and it's like open to anyone? And like, you just kind of talked about the inspiration behind it. I was just kind of curious of like, like it sounds like something very, um, to me, I feel like, you could correct me if I'm wrong, for you and your own healing process, helping people with whatever they're going to go through. That's kind of healing towards you, for you too, as well. And how you express whatever you're going to express in like the bad moments. You're musical, right? And I was listening to a song of yours and I really liked it. What was it? It's called Uncommon Commons. And that was such like a unique, song. I really liked that. And
Okay, so yeah, that was a YouTube video I made when I was auditioning to be a lyrics professor at the University of British Columbia like 10 years ago. And I used 3 songs as an example of, I was just like a sample lecture. I just made up a topic, songs about hitting on somebody. And I chose a song by Leonard Cohen and a song by Ani DeFranco, I think. And then I think I chose a song by myself called If I Wrote a Song. And that's the one you, I'm flattered that I'm tickled that you watched that and liked it.
that was really great, and I really enjoyed listening to it. And just like, oh my gosh, I wish that so many people could watch this, and like, especially like, oh hey guys, watch this, um, Yeah, but sorry.
But you were asking about Walk with
Yes,
Daniel.
I walk with Daniel. It's like what are some of the things that are interesting when you do that? A walk with Daniel. What are things that really stick
Yeah.
out to you? And
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, you asked, is it healing? I guess it is, but it's healing in the sense of it's expansive for me because it honors a certain part of me. So it's an expression of me. It's a self-expression. I'm an artist. I'm a musician. I'm a composer, which is kind of a solitary. You're at your piano. You're at your guitar for days. You're writing things, and then you get in a room with people and you collaborate. But that's a lot of lonely, self-absorbed time. Getting outside, taking a walk with somebody, helping them with something they're going through. I love that. I can't do that all day. I do it once a day at most. And it goes up and down in terms of how busy it is. There were times earlier this year where I was doing it 5 or 6 times a week. Right now, it's a lot less busy for whatever reason. But I can only do it at most once a day because I'm literally walking with people while we do it, either on the phone
oh,
or in person. And, an hour and a half is enough to go for a walk and be talking, at least for me. What stands out to me is that it's actually so many of the things that we're stuck with are not that complicated. That complication is a mental state, not a fact of the matter. That doesn't mean situations aren't complicated, but the feeling of stuckness that we end up with is usually attributable to a pretty simple set of errors of perception. That there is a way to look at anything with a certain amount of clarity. And the best way I've found to do that is to identify what is my actual intention here. Not what's my goal, not what's my philosophy, not what do I wish would happen, but what am I actually committed to here? And that can sometimes take a while. But once we get clear on what that is, freedom, peace, self-expression, transformation.
hello? Are you there?
Can you still hear me?
Sounds like we just lost your headphones, maybe.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Can you say something so I
Can
know?
you hear me?
Because I'm not sure if I can hear you.
It sounds like we lost you on the
Yeah, suddenly I
headphones.
can't hear you. So just give me a second.
No, we cannot hear you. We can see your mouth moving, but we can't hear you.
Well, there he goes. Hopefully he'll jump back in. How's the experience for you so
Oh,
far,
it's
Minnie?
very beneficial. I'm learning a lot as I go, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, you're doing a great job. You got some uh, great
Oh,
questions.
thanks.
How many more questions do you have for him when he comes back?
Probably just one more.
Okay, he's back.
Hi, I'm back, and I hear you now.
Guess who's back?
Hello.
Back again.
Yeah,
Daniel's
yeah.
back. Tell a friend.
That's right. That's right. I'm Daniel Maté, the real Daniel Maté. All you other Daniel Matés are just imitating. Um,
Would the real Daniel Maté please stand up?
um, exactly. No, he's going to sit down. Daniel Maté is going to please sit down because otherwise he's going to knock his microphone again. Anyway, so I love helping people see through their own BS, and it's unintentional BS, but it's the stuff that keeps them from being, um, themselves fully. And I like it because it's not, I don't focus on healing so much because healing is such a big word and everyone's like, I'm going to heal my trauma. Well, I can't heal your trauma. Well, first of all, I can't heal anyone's trauma. They can only do that themselves. But also, we can't do that in an hour and a half. It's more modest. It's like, what's pissing you off today? What are you stuck inside of? Let's have a victory there. And maybe that'll send a message to your quote unquote trauma saying, you know what, your days are numbered. You're not so set in stone. Because what the effect of trauma is response inflexibility, being stuck in the same set of reactions over and over again. Well, what if you weren't stuck? Well, then you'd have some wounds and they would flare up sometimes, but you wouldn't be trapped inside of their consequences. So, I don't know how useful it is for dealing with serious crisis situations. Most of my clients are, at least relatively speaking, well off and in social, cultural situations that offer them a certain amount of distance from survival considerations. Like I've never done a walk with Daniel with someone in Gaza. I did do one with a woman in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which is its own set of challenges. But there are limits to what I can do, is what I'm saying. And someone came to me who was suicidal a few months ago, and I said, I don't know how much I can help you. Maybe I can help you give yourself some space during which you can seek some real harm reduction help. So I have to be careful because I'm not a therapist. I'm a mental chiropractor. That's what I call myself. And I have to be careful to do that and not try to do something else. Fortunately, I only enjoy doing that. I don't enjoy doing anything else of this kind. I don't like being a therapist. That's why I'm not one. I don't have the patience to sit and hear about someone's entire childhood. Usually someone tells me what they're dealing with now, and I'll be like, okay, I can make some guesses about your childhood. You can tell me about your cultural heritage, and I can make some guesses about what you're carrying. That's about as far as I want to go. Just so we can say, you know what, you come by it honestly. But that's me. That's my capacity. I'm very good at going in to that. I'm not so good at going into like the deeper core issues. That's my dad's work. And God bless him. It's important work.
Awesome. Thank you.
We got a question from Alicia, or
yeah,
she's calling in. Let's take her real quick.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Hey, hi Alicia.
Hi. First, we just wanted to say thank you for acknowledging what I may or may not be doing with Christian's cover of the book. I have creative ideas for that. It's not lost. But I work as a clinical therapist, but I think I understand the work as a mental chiropractor is a bit more short term. And like you say, you're not going into like in-depth healing of trauma. But I see a place for this mental chiropractic and like mental alignment in long-term therapy. So I'm just wondering if you had any advice of where you see trauma impacting people's ability to become mentally aligned, and how we can use the work that you do in more longer-term therapy.
Thank you for those questions. I am only at the start of considering where mental chiropractic could fit into something longer term. And it's going to take collaborations and conversations with people like you for me to figure that out. Now, I've just agreed to do my first ever public demonstration of mental chiropractic in Ireland, of all places, in March. Group of therapists want to hear about the myth of normal and hear about mental chiropractic. And it's a very exciting prospect to me that might expand. I had someone from the American South contact me and tell me she's interested in me training her in this. I don't see any reason why I should be the world's only mental chiropractor, So I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means I have to patent something and brand it and sell. I don't have a mind for this kind of stuff. Personally, I would like to just see it out there, but I'd like to write a book on the topic. But personally, I don't think there's anything about trauma per se that prevents anyone's ability or that impinges on anyone's ability to benefit from this. There are maybe certain trauma-related situations in the present that would make it difficult. But that's like saying, 12-step addiction work can benefit anybody no matter the severity of their addiction, but they can't be actively involved in that addiction while they're doing it.
Right.
I mean, and you see people in those rooms who have had the absolute worst bottom out kind of experiences. That's not the problem. It's just that being currently ensconced in that is going to you can't absorb it. So, which is, again, harm reduction. But in terms of, I've had walks with the most outrageously traumatized people, The question is, in this moment, are you able to say, there are only 3 on-ramps or entryways into my mental chiropractic work, and all three of the gates have to be passed through. Number 1 is the ability to say, I'm stuck. Just the ability to admit, you know what, I'm stuck. Which already is a step up from, why is everything happening to me? Or they're out to get me or something like that. No, just, I'm stuck. Sort of just a humble, at-home kind of assessment. That is where I'm at. I am stuck. I have tried everything I know to try. I've applied all of my knowledge. I've done all kinds of therapy. I know I'm traumatized and I'm stuck. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2 is, I'm willing to get unstuck. Now that sounds like it should be a slam dunk, right? Because when we're stuck, there's a part of us that's perfectly content to stay there. Because being stuck has its advantages. It's at least a safe position.
It's almost comfortable at that point.
Usually it can be almost comfortable at that point, absolutely. There's part of it that is. It's about risk management, When things get so bad that it's dangerous to stay where we are, we usually get unstuck pretty quickly. So being stuck is a function of the urgency not being high enough in some ways. So by saying I'm willing to get unstuck, you're at least anteing up at the table of real change and saying, okay, I've got skin in the game, I'm willing to. And then the third thing, and this may be the hardest for some people, but most people take to it very quickly, is I'm willing to consider the very strong likelihood, bordering on 100% probability, that it's my point of view that's keeping me stuck, not the external situation. There's some flaw or some feature of my point of view that guarantees that I will be stuck as long as I stay in that point of view, and that there must be another point of view available, at least one, even theoretically. So if you can say all 3 of those things, I'm stuck, I'm willing to get unstuck, I'm willing to really strongly consider that it's my point of view keeping me stuck, you're ready to do it. Now, some people aren't there, and if they're not, I'm not going to try. Wouldn't help. It might even hurt. But right. I do think that those 3 are pretty universally applicable. You don't have to be any special kind of person to be able to say that. And I'm pretty confident that because the method doesn't promise to solve the problem. I don't call myself a problem solver. I call myself a problem dissolver. I'm going to help dissolve the way you're framing the problem. Come up with a bigger, better way of framing the problem so that it gives you some power.
Yeah, I love that.
Without
and so dissolving
erasing the very real material conditions. Yeah, resolving or solving, dissolving. And I want to say it's without minimizing or erasing the very real material conditions people are dealing with. This is not to say, oh, it's all in your mind over matter. No, matter matters. But even then, you may have a choice that you don't realize in terms of how you respond to those material conditions.
Yeah. I see it as thinking of people I work with, once they're able to do those things that you said, those kind of 3 pillars of change, that's when the tides shift and they're able, it's like a pathway into just a deeper sense of healing. And like, it's not the destination, but it's a pathway to that direction where they're wanting to go. So thank you for that. That really helps.
I think, I think that's right. You're welcome. And also, like I said, one of the hallmarks of trauma is being stuck in responses, and even the experience of having a new thought, even one new thought. When you've been stuck for long enough, the idea of having an original thought is like, whew, that would be a breath of fresh air. So
Yeah.
the capacity to get the mind thinking in a new way itself, even if you don't like the new way, even if you throw it out afterwards, there's something valuable about that. You're waking something up that is an essential part of who we are as human beings. It's just nutritious to oxygenate our logic and our perceptions, to give it a breath of fresh air.
And all three of those questions are so empowering. It gives people more agency over their lives, over the trauma. So,
Correct, which might
yeah.
which might be one reason that part of them has no. That might be one reason that the part of them that's happy to stay stuck would have no interest in asking those questions.
Yes.
But most people,
Exactly.
honestly, are willing to. People are courageous. That's another thing I'm struck by on these walks. People are really courageous and resourceful and really smart. And the minute they get for themselves what their actual intention is, it doesn't take much force from me to point out, hey, the way you've been looking at it kind of counter to your actual intentions, isn't it? People see it immediately and
Yeah.
can laugh at themselves.
Yeah. We need to get you up here to Alaska to do one of those workshops.
Dude, I would be there in a heartbeat. In fact, I would insist on driving up
Ooh.
from Vancouver
Yes.
because I
Let's
like to
make it
drive. I like to
happen.
drive everywhere. Hell yeah.
Yeah, we'll see where the
Thank
money's
you.
at. See if we can make that happen.
Right.
Thanks, Alicia, for calling in. All right, we're getting there on time, and so I just want to ask another question before we wrap it up. And this is the critical social worker in me, and I'm throwing you kind of a curveball. So I'm sorry I didn't prep you for it or anything. But in the book, you and your father, you reference how we can learn from Indigenous folks and Indigenous cultures, and it's mostly towards the back end of the book, and it's good content. And so my question to you is this: so instead of having, because you'll see this in a lot of different realms, especially in books, you'll see like a section put to the side or something for it. How do we move? Let me say this: how do we make it transformative to the point where we can move from having a section about how Indigenous culture or Indigenous ideas or Indigenous ways of being or thinking or living can help us, to integrating that so it's actually a part of what we do, and it's actually, and I'm not saying it's not ingrained throughout the spirit of your book. I'm just saying, how can we explicitly do that? How can we, make it actually become a part of it instead of, somewhat of a marginalized topic?
I mean, that's a great question. One would have to set out to write a book about that, and there are books about that, but it's a vastly neglected topic as well. And, you look at the Palestinian struggle for freedom. It's been going on since 1948 or 67, whenever you want to start the clock, I would say earlier. But the entire world is focused on it right now, whatever they think about it. What Native people on this continent have been through is one of the most overlooked, swept under the rug, misunderstood, and abandoned moral outrages in history. Surely, at least in part, because our entire society is based on it. Like, the expansion of America was the first consequence of American expansion to the West. And so we don't want to look at that. We don't want to feel guilty. When I say we, I mean polite white society. We would have to be willing to face how we became who we became, that North America was settled by homeless white people who left Europe not because they were doing great, but because they were not doing so great. And we came here to escape our own hell. And when I say we, I'm not talking about me particularly. My family came in 1956 during the Hungarian Revolution, but it's true, they were trying to But I'm talking about way, way, way a long time ago. And I'm not immune to it either. I'm a part of the white or white presenting society. But we came and we inflicted our own hell on the people here, and we'd have to be willing to look at what they went through. Actually tell the truth about it. And it's just been too easy to ignore it, except for the occasional, news cycle where, they find mass graves in Canada or wherever, or, Martin Scorsese has a new movie coming out about the exploitation and murder of the Osage people, still told from the point of view of a white man. I actually saw a clip of a couple of Osage members of the production, including like the language consultant at the premiere, saying, I'm really grateful for this film, and at the same time it's told from a white man's perspective. I mean, we can seek out native made culture, and I would say Reservation Dogs is maybe the best thing on television in the last 3 or 4 years. It's remarkable, and made exclusively by native people, written, produced, shot, starring, except for a few white guest stars. It's incredible. It's great.
One of the just to chime in on that, one of the cool things about that show is that they're reflective. It's not just like you said, it's mostly Indigenous folks that are putting it together, actors, producers, writers, and everything like that. But it's not like they just glorify or simplify things. It's a totally self-honest reflection, and I really appreciate that about that show. Check it out if you can. Reservation Dogs on Hulu.
It's hilarious. It's moving. It's completely irreverent. I mean, even from the very beginning with that Dallas Goldtooth character, the sort of native spirit who always shows up and, is acting. I've met him. I've seen his stand-up routine. He's hilarious. And one of his main things is to sort of make fun of some of the cliches about native culture. Is this character named Powwow Guy who's always, he's sort of, and, I'm not a part of that culture, so I can't speak to it, but it feels very real and loving, but at the same time sharp and satirical. And that's actually very humanizing. Just like, I shouldn't say his name, but, Woody Allen made some great parodies of some of the aspects of being Jewish in North America. So yeah, Reservation Dogs is just full of amazing humanity and the kids' ambivalent relationship, but proud relationship to their native heritage. It just feels really lived in. But what you cannot deny coming away from that show is these are people who have been through something that most of us have not looked at and have not understood and have not wanted to understand. But if we want to actually be in the world we're in, we have to face the reality of what's happened. And we can do that without taking on a useless burden of impotent guilt. Because people are afraid of guilt. People don't want to feel guilty. Okay, well then don't feel guilty. Feel compassionate. Feel angry. Feel like you want to do something about it. But I do think it's possible to be responsible without being burdened by crippling guilt. And the fact is, no matter how much we acknowledge, even if we were to tomorrow acknowledge the truth of what's happened to Native peoples, no one's coming to take away our white privilege. It's okay. It's safe. We're good. I'm not going to have to give up my nice apartment in Brooklyn just because there was a genocide. Which means there's not even any cost to me to just admit it. The only cost to me is my ignorance, and I might need to get to know some people I don't know. And yeah, I might have to give up some of my privilege, but I'm going to be fine. So people get threatened even by the notion of, Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses has this great lyric, I've worked too hard for my illusions just to throw them all away. And that's how a lot of us feel. We've really invested in our comfortable illusions about America or Canada or whatever. We don't want to have them threatened, and anyone who brings them up must be an enemy or mean us harm. But you want to talk about healing? Healing is moving from fracturing to wholeness. There's no wholeness if we don't admit, as in let in and allow the things that have happened. And we can't see each other. We can't connect. If I want to be friends with Minnie, but I refuse to look at what her family's been through and really hear the impact it's had on her, Just like if she wanted to be friends with me and had no interest in the Holocaust, it would put a real superficial damper on our relationship. It'd be tough to actually, our relationship wouldn't mean much. So healing is always about allowing more room for things, not less room. And allowing contradictions and paradoxes to live right next to each other. So if I'm going to heal my relationship with my parents, it's not going to do for me to say, oh, well, it wasn't so bad what I went through. It's also not going to do to say, you motherfuckers, you've ruined me for life. Somehow I need to be able to hold in one hand, my childhood left me with wounds, and my parents were the starring characters in my childhood. So my wounds are connected to them. Their fingerprints are on my wounds and always will be. And they're not responsible for my pain today. And they've also loved me my whole life and did their best, and they were traumatized themselves. All the other things, right? So it's not even like one hand or the other hand. It's like 8 hands. You'd have to be an octopus to hold all the different paradoxes. But that's what wisdom is. That's what maturity is. And I think when we're moving towards healing, we have more room for seemingly conflicted things rather than less. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. And ultimately, we're responsible for that balance that we're holding. So that's what I aspire to, and that's what feels the best to me.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. So as we wrap it up, I just want to share a quick story that took place shortly after I read the book, The Myth of Normal. And I've been going through a transformative process for years now, so I'm not ascribing it completely to reading the book, but it definitely contributed, and it was right in line with what I needed. But similar to what you've been talking about, and I touched on this at the beginning, but, I felt cursed for most of my life. I had a lot of conflicts from childhood that were unresolved that I carried with me until really recently. And, it affected my present relationship with both my mother and my father, who've been split my whole life. But I couldn't see myself going home. I couldn't see myself, getting back into a relationship and, repairing those things. I just didn't see it. I didn't feel like that they were doing the work that they needed to and all these things. And then after I read that book, I had this like epiphany that came through my mind, I guess not through my mind, really through my heart. And I was like, I just need to let all that shit go. And I wrote my mom an email, and I asked her if I could have a phone conversation with her and write some things down and tell her. I wrote all these things down, and I told her. And the conversation didn't actually go as like I thought it would. Afterwards, she didn't have much to say. But the miracle of the whole thing was after I told her all those things and let it go, those things haven't plagued me at all anymore. Like, I don't even think about them. I'm not saying it's like they didn't happen, but almost.
Well, I was just going to say, has the history changed at all? Did anything that happened suddenly not happen? No. All that changed was your relationship to it. And first of all, I'd say congratulations. That's remarkable and admirable, and I'm moved that the Myth of Normal sparked that in you, but you did it. Number 2, I would say, can I interview you, please, for the Hello Again book, because that's an amazing story.
Absolutely.
And number 3, I would say, okay, great, we'll be in touch. Number 3, I would say, you said you realized you had to let it go. That's a fine way of putting it, but the way I always slightly reframe that is, it let you go. Because you saw it for what it is. And it let you go, and that allowed you to say, I need to let this go, but you already had let it go. And then you took the appropriate action that was aligned with that, which is to write your mom a letter and let her know that you're letting it go. So that's what happens when we look reality in the face. I had a mental chiropractic client say, I know what the reality is, I just can't accept it. I said, if you knew what the reality was, there'd be nothing to accept because it's just reality. What you can't accept is your version of reality. That's why you're holding on to it. Because if you accepted it, you'd have to move on.
Yeah, that's a fantastic
doesn't
way to put it.
Doesn't mean we have to like it. Doesn't mean it doesn't still affect us. Doesn't mean we don't get to still be angry about it. Means we don't get to still be stuck by it. And that's a big difference because anger is an emotion, which means it can move. Stuckness doesn't, by definition.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. We got to wrap it up. First of all, I want to turn to you, Minnie. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us and being a most excellent co-host. You've done a great job. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, throughout this semester, but especially as we've been working on this podcast. And again, you did an excellent job. I'm really proud of you. But mostly, thank you for joining us and and being my partner today. I wanted to give you an
Oh no,
opportunity for any last
I
words,
really
Minnie.
appreciate this topic. I was so excited to do the podcast, and I was very excited about your work and your dad's work. And looking back on the whole thing with the indigenous people and things that we've been through, it's kind of going back on like you and your dad's relationship. The quote quote white man's like the parent, and us are like the children. And I don't know. I just kind of want to put that in that perspective, and like, oh, it's just going to be hard to address, but the damage has happened, the hurt has happened, the harm has happened. Now it's just having to go back to the healing part, and I just want to, with the reservation dogs. Even though our people been through a lot of things, it's such a great way how we express ourselves, and even though we've gone through this
Mm.
biggest pain in our life that could be used as fuel to do good, to go on and go forward and do good. And reservation to dogs is just like a product of that. Even though yes, we've been through this hurt and we've been through this pain, something great came out of it. And my favorite quote is by Maya Angelou. There is no greater, what she say, there is no greater pain than bearing an untold story. And I really appreciate
Mm.
your mental chiropractor because, I'm a big, huge fan on allowing people to express themselves to in any way, shape, or form, but in a healthy manner and with a person who will help you. And you're one of those people, the helpers, because, multiple times there's people who share something and it kind of harmed them, and but I would really I applaud your work. I applaud everything that you've done so far, and I'm looking forward to your Hello Again. And you're right, not many books are out there on parent and child relationship, and I love the title Hello Again. It's kind of like reintroducing yourself but as an adult. And like I said, I really appreciate your work, and I'm so excited to see um um that whole outcome. And when you do come to Alaska and you come across Native people, um, just FYI, we teach you all the bad words first before we teach you the good.
Excellent. That's always my priority.
um,
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things about what you said, Minnie, if that's okay,
yeah.
and then I'm going to need to go. Number one, the comparison between natives and white people on the one hand, and children receiving parents, trauma is a remarkable one. It's a very sobering one. I would just say that it's been your fate to be treated like the traumatized children of this continent. It's not necessarily your destiny, and your destiny lies in, I think, the best of your humanity coming back online as you recover from trauma, and what you mentioned about reservation dogs, creating something new, creating something beautiful, creating your own stories, and using the white man's technology to do it, by the way. That's pretty cool.
Eh? Touche,
you
touche.
know, Netflix or FX is not an indigenous built thing, but you took over and just, not you, but you know what I'm saying? That's pretty cool. Just like, hip hop kind of bum rushed the music industry and sampled all kinds of stuff and made it recombinant and told new stories. I love what you said about untold stories. So that's wonderful. Thank you. And I would also say, yeah, I'm happy to be one of the helpers, and I'm also very lucky that my form of helping people comes
Mm.
through challenging them, because that for me is a lot of fun. All right, I'm going to need to log off. Thank you. Will you please send me the link where I can share the recording of this?
I will. I just got one last thing to say to you real quick, Daniel. I just want
Yeah.
to say thank you for coming. And one of the themes that I try to express on this show is the term social work or social worker has been over professionalized to where we only look at it as a social worker as somebody that goes and gets a degree and whatever. But that's not true. There's lots of people out there doing social work, from Bob Marley, making music back in the days, to Daniel Maté. So Daniel, before we leave, I just wanted to crown you revolutionary social worker. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. I hope to get a chance to work with you again in the future sometime.
First time me and Bob Marley ever been mentioned in the same sentence, but I'll say Irie and one love, and thank you for
Right.
that.
Right on.
Thank
All right,
you.
Daniel, take care.
Peace.
All right. Well, that concludes today's episode. Next episode this coming Monday at 10 a.m. Alaska time is with Dr. Michael Yellowbird. Michael Yellowbird is a distinguished scholar and relentless advocate for Indigenous empowerment. Dr. Yellowbird has dedicated his life to extensive work in Indigenous social work, decolonizing methodologies, and Indigenous health, mending scholarship with advocacy to challenge and change the narrative surrounding Indigenous communities. He's renowned for his pioneering concepts and practices in what he calls neuro-decolonization, a fascinating approach that seeks to utilize mind-body practices, helping Indigenous folks heal from historical trauma through traditional knowledge and cutting-edge neuroscience. Beyond academia, Dr. Yellowbird is a force of social transformation, using his platform to address critical issues ranging from environmental justice, mental health, to the rights and cultural revival of Indigenous groups worldwide. His eloquence, coupled with a deep reservoir of both personal and scholarly insight, makes him an extraordinary figure in contemporary discussions around these urgent topics. And I am very much looking forward to speaking with and learning from Dr. Michael Yellowbird next Monday, October 23rd, 10 a.m., recording live on Riverside. So yeah, you can catch the live sessions through our Riverside studio, and you can find the recorded episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and anywhere else you can find podcasts. Really, you ought to be able to find us. So stay connected and updated with our podcast by liking the UAF social work page, following A Conscious Party on Instagram. And that's it. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. The Critical Social Worker is a joint endeavor between the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and A Conscious Party Productions. Today's episode featured Daniel Maté, Minnie, and Christian Ace Stettler, myself. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work. This has been a Conscious Party production. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. All right, everyone, until next time, peace.